Hey pals! This video is about something we interact with every single day. Today we take a look at Yes, I know it sounds like there wouldn't be a lot to this fabric, but we take it for granted. Variations of it, or these weaving styles, have been around for millennia in one way or another. Before we get into that, I'll be getting technical light with some of my wording at some points. So in case you don't know all the terms, here's a quick rundown of common terms that might come up in this video. In fabric terminology, first we have the selvages. They're the finished edges unable to fabric when you buy from the shop. On some printed cotton, there's the white strip along the two edges, sometimes with the manufacturer's or designer's name printed along it. On other fabrics, it's got a fuzzy edge to it. Regardless of how they're presented, these edges won't fray. Then we have the raw edges. At the fabric store, you've got your bolt of fabric, and the person who's cutting it for you cuts along this edge. This is a side little fray or that you can pull the yarns off from. And speaking of yarns, when you hear yarn, you're probably thinking of something like this. Or maybe a smaller version. Well, I guess it's a bit of a misnomer, because it's actually a ball of yarns. That one particular ball of yarn has each strand comprised of 4 yarns of fiber spun together. And then here are some yarns from a piece of woven muslin fabric. Next up, we have the No, not that. It's just the warp. They're the yarns that run parallel to the selvage. If you pick at the raw edge of a freshly cut bolt of fabric, they don't easily peel off. It's what will be left dangling when you remove the weft. Now these yarns run perpendicular to the selvage. They're what you can easily pull off of the raw edge. There are different names for the weft as well. It's sometimes known as the woof or the filling. So if I say one of those, or you come across them in the wild, this is what's being talked about. Now finally, there's a pick. A pick is one filling yarn. Some fabrics have multiple fillings going at once, so you might have to futz with 1 or 2 picks, but leave the others alone. They can also be called shoots, shots, or shuffles, depending on your source. I can jump into the speculation zone for a second. I have no real idea why they have these names. My thought is that you're picking the specific yarns you want or need to work with, hence pick. And they're shot or shuffled by the shuttle. Say that 5 times fast. I tried when I was writing my notes for this. It was all, blah, 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 blah. Again, no idea if these are the real reasons. Those are my thoughts, which are perfect for the speculation zone. Okay, back to reality. Those are some quick terms that will come up here, and I wanted you to know what I was fucking talking about, and who knows, they could come up in future videos as well. So what exactly is terrycloth? It is a looped pile fabric. If you look at your bath towel, you'll see the little loops. That's the pile. This is where there are 2 warp threads woven between the fillings, one called the ground warp and the other is the pile warp. The ground warp lays flat throughout the construction, while the pile warp is pulled up to form a loop, either manually or by the machine. These loops could cover the entire fabric or be used to create a pattern. There are typically 3 fillings, a third providing the slack needed for the pile warp to be able to create the pile. It can be made on basic looms or with a jacquard loom. If you want to know about jacquard looms, I briefly talk about them in my Abridged History of Damask member video. Sometimes a dobby arm or a dobby loom is used to create the terry weave. And no, I do not mean this guy toiling away. Dobby arms or looms are specially made attachments and machines that allow you to control the loom harnesses to make designs that basic looms can't handle or that don't make sense economically when using a jacquard loom. Weaves made with a dobby could take up to 30 harnesses to make their patterns and could use several hundred picks. The applications of terrycloth are many. I go by many names. But that'll be peppered in throughout this video. There are 3 main types of terrycloth. Towel terry, which as the name suggests, you'll know from the towels in your bathroom. Like other things, it has alternate names like terry toweling and Turkish toweling, though I think Turkish toweling isn't used as much anymore, so you may mostly only see it in a historical context. I'm not sure. But regardless, it's piled on both sides of the fabric and usually made of cotton nowadays. Then there's French terry and terry velour. Both are more in the fashion realm and are only piled on one side. Terry velour has a more velvety look or feel to it on the smooth side, where French terry doesn't. Those types are the most common. Then there are the ones that you don't see as much, like terry poplin, which is a heavier poplin fabric made with a mixture of silk and wool, where the silk is used for the pile warp, and the loops are teeny tiny. And ones I don't think that are made anymore, like terry velvet, which is a velvet with an uncut pile. According to Fairchild's Dictionary of Textiles, this is an obsolete terry weave made of silk and was mostly used in England as a trim to various garments. So if you find some, cherish it. Okay, cherish that shit. Now, you've heard me mention velvet a couple times. That's because velvet is technically made with a type of terry weave. However, the fabric found it didn't really like being styled like that, so it decided to go up to the salon and just get a little taken off the top. So it wasn't looped anymore. The reason why this has been a popular type of weave, especially for things like towels, is because it's a crazy absorbent, especially the ones with cotton fibers. It just kind of slurps up the water and dries relatively quickly. Now I know you're going penny. This is titled An Abridged History of Terrycloth, but we haven't done any historying. That's a word now, okay? Add it to your dictionaries. No worries, pals. While I gave the quick lowdown on it, the DeLorean's been warming up in this cold weather, and now it's ready, so let's go. Our first stop is in 3000 BCE along the banks of the Nile. I mean, really, there aren't that many tourist destination hubs that we know of at this time, so where else are we going to go, right? Weavers of the day used horizontal looms during this pre-dynastic period. There were a couple of setup methods for them. They could be between the weaver's waist and a tree, or between poles, sticks, whatever anchored in the ground, and sometimes even just between some trees. Fun fact, some nomadic peoples still use horizontal looms in this manner to this day. I mean, it's easy to set up, so why not? If it's not broke. By the late 2000s BCE, linen towels were being made with an early version of a terry weave. How do we know this? Because of these. They were found in a dig in the earliest 20th century and are the first extant examples of looped and knotted weaves that I am aware of. They believe that these linen fabrics had yarns pulled out into loops, not just to create interesting patterns, but also to provide warmth. And that kind of makes sense. I mean, modern towels are cozy and warm, and even if the techniques used now are different to way back when, we still get to the same place. But it wasn't just early Egyptians that were doing this weave, though. On the other side of the world, the Wari and Tiwanaku, I hope I said that right, Tiwanaku tribes of pre-Columbian Peru and the surrounding areas made hats that have a velvety sheen to them. And I know, I keep banging on about velvet, but
I have a point, I promise.
it may take a few minutes to get there, but I'll get there. Going ahead a few centuries, we now check in with China. I mean, ancient and medieval China did a lot over the centuries, including, as it's thought, inventing velvet. I'm still not at my point. I'm getting there. I gotta lay some foundation stones, okay? Now, we don't know specifically when it was invented, but by the 13th century, China was making it. By the 15th century CE, long before Christopher Eustis made his infamous voyage across the Atlantic, French terry, remember that? Yeah? Well, French terry was making waves across Europe as the it thing for the haute couture crowd. It was used in fashion for things like shirts and tunics and also for home items like towels. They were typically made with cotton wool or a cotton wool blend, depending on your status. Now we get to the more modern way of making terrycloth in 17th century Turkey. Yes, the general weaving method for terrycloth as we know it today was established around 400 years ago.
And as I always say, if it's not Baruch,
Don't fix it.
Except this one thing. According to the Textile Institute, formerly the Manchester Textile Institute, some Turkish weavers hooked up with a loom and invented terrycloth. So they did in fact break the process. Because the weavers were Turkish, one of the names for it is Turkish toweling. Look at that. I'd love to expand on the story, but according to the paper that sourced them, the original document was apparently written in Turkish, so I wouldn't be able to understand it anyway. And when I went to their website and tried to search for anything related to Terry, this is what happened. Like every damn time. The fuck Textile Institute? But here we are at my point. Those foundation stones have been sitting here patiently, and now we're here. First off, French terry was a thing long before this point. Also, velvet was a thing long before this point, as well as using silk, like the Turkish weavers were. So how did they invent it? Velvet and velour are both made when you pile some of the warp yarns, like you do with terrycloth, and then you cut the loops. Did they stumble upon a different way that sounds like it was more efficient since it was adopted everywhere? Yes. I'd agree with that statement. They came up with the general way that we still weave the fabric today, but they didn't invent the fabric. 1840s France had become a bit of a hub for the manufacturing of this new weaving style, but they were still mainly using silk rather than cotton like what we're more familiar with today. Now, I have some mildly conflicting details for this next little bit between some sources. There was an Englishman named Sam Holt who may have first made terrycloth in 1848, but he also may have made terrycloth knitting machines that could produce the fabric on an industrial scale sometime in the 1850s. But when I read that, it didn't mention that he had been the first to use cotton. I also read that in 1850, specifically, a man named Henry Christie started to produce cotton fiber terrycloth on an industrial scale, not Sam Holt. So yeah, not 100% sure who or even the specific year, but these advancements happened in England. There's at least consensus on that.
Rule! Britannia! Britannia rules the waves!
The French terry version continued to be used in fashion items since the Renaissance, waxing and waning in popularity, as all trends do in the fashion world, and once we hit the 19th century, it had become the go-to choice in athletic wear for activities such as golf, tennis, and sailing. In the 1920s, a new loom called a loop wheel machine was being used to create terrycloth. However, it had one little drawback. They were slow. Like, I'm sure this guy was faster. It only produced 1 yard of fabric every hour. It hit peak popularity in the 40s and 50s, but it fell out of favor not long after that. If you really want to get some, there are still, at last reckoning, 2 factories in the world that make it this way. If you want to check them out, most people are going to have to grab their passports though, because one is in Japan and the other is in Germany. Due to its rarity, you're going to be paying a pretty penny if you want to get the fabric though, so keep that in mind. Back to the 1930s though. By this point in time, luxury hotels, as well as the rich and famous, followed the example of their Renaissance counterparts, and cotton fiber terrycloth was now the fabric of choice for their towels. It was the pinnacle of toiletry comfort, a status symbol of quality. And I mean, can you blame them? It's just so soft and comfy. French terry expanded in popularity from athletic wear to loungewear like hoodies and sweats, as well as swimsuits and cover-ups in 50s and 60s America. It was such a big thing that 007 and Goldfinger themselves wore this fabric on the big screen in 1964's Goldfinger. This trend then spread across the world. In the late 70s, we had well-known fashion houses bringing terry-woven fabrics to more people in more settings. Designers like Ralph Lauren were now making dresses, shirts, shorts, and more, bringing them to the masses. There was even a Ralph Lauren blazer that was 158 USD. In today's money, that's $690. Could you imagine spending that much on a blazer? That's ridiculous. However, clearly not everybody thought that was ridiculous because the New York Times published an article in the spring of 1979 called Terrycloth, All Dressed Up. And it went on about the success of terrycloth in the American fashion world, in the latter part of the decade. As everything does in fashion, Terrycloth's popularity faded for a while, but still remained popular in our bathrooms. But the 90s brought a resurgence of fashion love before popularity waned again, but it never truly went away. In the modern day, there have been some alternatives to terrycloth that have come out. Waffle fabric is a long-standing alternative. It's a honeycomb-esque weave that, if you couldn't tell by the name, looks like a waffle. It's also quite absorbent. I don't know if it's as absorbent as terry, but it's quite comfy. I have a couple shirts with a waffle weave. In fact, I'm wearing one in this very video. Another alternative is microfiber. So, not all alternatives are created equal. And besides the fact that it feels weird to the touch, my hands aren't fully dry after trying to use it as a towel, and it sheds when you're trying to dry. I have a microfiber towel with a design on it. A big chunk of that design is black because it's a wicked towel and has alphabet silhouette on it. Okay, it sheds the fibers onto my skin. A towel should not do that. And aside from the consumer side of things, microfiber isn't the best for the environment. It's made of synthetic fibers, which is plastic, if you didn't already know. If they catch fire, they can emit toxic gases depending on the specific plastics used in that particular batch. Polyester and nylon are frequently made with petrochemicals, so non-renewable resources that aren't biodegradable. And if that's not enough, they add to water pollution like microplastics do. See, when you toss that microfiber in the washer, some of the fibers wear off and end up in the washing machine runoff, which then ends up in the oceans, rivers, streams, etc. And also, let's not forget, the water table, which then means that it impacts the agriculture industry as well, because anything that ends up in the water table has consequences for them. So yeah, not all alternatives are created equal. And if you have microfiber in your home like I do, I mean, don't feel bad. I didn't know about that, and like I kind of knew it was plastic because like, faux fur is plastic and that's, a microfiber as well. Kind of like anyways. I didn't know until this video, like until I was doing the research for this video. So it's like, but at the same time, I can't afford to get a nice big bath towel, right? Like all my towels that I have are too small for that, or I have a microfiber towel because the other ones were too old and ratty to continue to use in that way. Hence why I made bath mats out of them. So yeah, like don't feel too bad. Just, going forward, we can make these choices with our purchasing based on the new information that we now have, right? It is what it is. Nowadays, most of the technology behind making this fabric that we don't tend to think about has improved since the days of Samuel and Henry Christie. I think we took a step back with microfiber because that's not a good thing, but we can now make it faster and sometimes make better quality. But the actual techniques used to make our towels and some fashion items are, at their base, the same. And despite the whims of fashion, I think that this is a fabric that will stay in our hearts and by our showers for many more centuries to come. If you haven't checked out the video that inspired this one, the link can be found in the description below and in the members area. So take a gander. Until next time, pals, blessed be. Ooh, what does that mean? In fabric term, it's not true. Okay. And then is Towel Terry, which, as the name suggests, what a break.